السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope people can hear me, and if I am audible and properly visible, if someone can confirm that. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. So Jazakallah khair again for joining us to our series, Scenes from the Seerah. Again, apologize about the late start yesterday, and also I apologize about my absolutely illegible writing. I realized once I watched my own video on the cell phone that I'm still writing really small, and I might not have been very clear unless somebody was using a big screen. It was probably still very small. So I'm going to try to really enhance my writing as best as I can, and please feel free to mention again in the chat if the writing is not legible or not big enough for you guys to read. So, inshallah, let's go ahead and begin. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallam. So, if you remember yesterday, we covered the early life of the Prophet ﷺ, including his early childhood as well as his adolescence, his 20s and 30s. We, if you remember, talked about his marriage to Khadija radiyallahu anhu, as well as the children that were born to him and his household that consisted of, in addition to his daughters, it was also Zayd radiyallahu anhu, as well as who became his adopted son, and Ali radiyallahu anhu. So those are all the people that were a part of his household. So pardon my daughter who's in the background. She just escaped from her mom. So inshallah, hopefully she will not be much of a disruption. Anyways, the next step would be to talk about the revelation. So when we were speaking about the Prophet ﷺ yesterday, talked about that he'd settled down, he had married, and now, so the Prophet ﷺ would retreat and spend long periods of time in contemplation, meditation, muraqabah, tahannut, whatever you want to call it. He would essentially separate himself from his family. And a lot of times when one of us has those moments that we want some private time, the most that we would do is go to our basement, go to our room and close our doors. The Prophet ﷺ would go outside of his house from Makkah all the way to Cave Hira. And if you've been to Makkah, and if you've seen where Cave Hira is, it's quite a trek. So you can understand how serious his contemplation was, right? So he would leave everything, and then he would go all the way up to the mountain. He would take some days worth of food, and he would just stay there. And the scholars talk about what he would do there, and it's just deep contemplation about the purpose of life. And he's seeing how people are corrupt. He's seeing how religion is corrupt. He's seeing how society is corrupt, and he is in trying to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then that is when the first revelation happens. And Jibreel alayhi salatu salam, the archangel Gabriel, appears to him, and the first words of the Quran are revealed. Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. Right? So if we want to realize the importance of that moment, it's essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicating with mankind. Of course, that had happened before as well with the other prophets, but this was the final message, right? This is the final messenger with the final message. So this was again in the month of Ramadan. In the last, scholars say it's the 21st of Ramadan. But regardless, one of the last 10 days of Ramadan was when the first ayah of the Quran were revealed. And that is why we have the importance of the upcoming month Ramadan, which is also called the month of the Quran. And we as Muslims need to recognize that this was the month where the Quran was revealed, and this is the time that we have to get back and reconnect ourselves to the Quran as well. So inshallah, that is something that we should keep in our mind going forwards, entering into the month of Ramadan. But regardless, the angel comes, Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam comes, and then he gives these words to Prophet. Now you can imagine perhaps the mental state of the Prophet. He's just seeing this out of the world experience. He's having this out of the world experience, and the angel has come to him and he's asking him to read. And the Prophet is unlettered, he's unread, yani he's never learned to read and write. So he says, I cannot read. Then the angel says that to him again and gives him a squeeze, right? A tight hug. And then he says the same words again. And this happens 3 times. And finally, the Prophet starts repeating the words, right? So the first few words of the Quran are revealed. And the Prophet absorbs them, and he's still very, very shaken with the whole experience, right? And immediately, he runs back to his house. So the first thing, this is again the early Meccan period, right? So it's going to start writing a little bigger again, right? So we're still talking about the Mecca period, and this is the early Meccan period, okay? So the first thing that happens is the revelation, right? So Iqra, right? Prophet receives the revelation. He goes down, immediately goes to his wife, Khadija radiyallahu anha, right? Now, Khadija radiyallahu anha, as soon as, and then he relates what happened, right? He relates what's happened, and he's confused. He's trying to understand what's going on. And at that point, at that tender moment, you realize the relationship of the Prophet with his wife, as a husband and wife, and you also recognize the kind of husband the Prophet was, as well as the recognition of Khadija. As soon as she hears that, she says, it is impossible that this was an evil spirit. It is impossible that something bad is happening to you. You are such a good man. As a wife, she has seen the Prophet. And if anybody's wife can testify to a person's goodness, you can certify that man as 100%, great man. Because, no matter who I can be, you ask my wife and you meet with her for 5 minutes and you ask me who I am, she'll tell you my reality, right? But if a wife can say to her husband on his face that you are truly a good person, and she describes a couple of qualities of the Prophet, right? She says you feed the poor, you support the poor, you join kinship, you are good and gracious to the guests. And she says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never belittle you, will never do anything to harm you. And then she takes him immediately to her cousin. Waraqa bin Nawfal. So Waraqa is an old person, he's an older man, and he's a Christian. And when the Prophet ﷺ relates to him what happens, immediately he says, this is the same angel, the Namus, that was sent to Musa. If you are a prophet, and eventually there will come a time where people are going to drive you out of the city. And the Prophet ﷺ is shocked. Makkah loves him. He's as-Sadiq al-Amin. People are coming to him day in and day and night. Right? And he is the most helpful of people. He cannot fathom the fact that there might be a time that people are going to drive him out. And Waraqa says, anybody who comes with this message, that's what happens to him. And if I'm alive at that time, I will support you to the best of my ability. But unfortunately, Waraqa doesn't survive for too long. He dies a few days later. But that is the first and immediate thing that happens. Now, after that happens, after the first revelation happens, then there is a period of revelation not happening. And it is this point which is very, very distressing for Prophet, right? He's had this out of this world experience, and he's now confused as to what's going on. And, at times he has these thoughts in his mind, should I just go ahead and end this life? He thinks about, should I just go ahead up the mountain and jump off the mountain and just end this out? And whenever he would have those thoughts, Jibreel alayhi salam would appear to him again. And he would see him clearly on the horizon in his form. And he would say, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you are the messenger and I'm Jibreel. And that would give itminan, that would give satisfaction to Prophet. So this goes on for a few months for some time. And then gradually the revelation of the Quran becomes regular. So when this has happened, right, when initially the Prophet ﷺ is commanded to share the message with his family, the next thing that happens is the acceptance of Islam, right? So initially the dawah is hidden. The Prophet ﷺ is doing a hidden dawah. So because obviously a message saying there is no God but just one God, and all the idols and all the false gods that are being created by the Quraysh, if that concept is propagated, immediately the Prophet ﷺ knew that the people are not going to respond to it well. So he starts propagating the message within his family. And immediately his wife is the first Muslimah. Interestingly, she immediately accepts Islam. The second people, or the first few people, I should say, to accept Islam is the household of the Prophet ﷺ. Zayd bin Haritha, the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ, who chose to live with him rather than his own family and his father, he accepts the message. And then Ali bin Abi Talib, who is also now living in the household of the Prophet ﷺ, who is a young boy, who's a very, very young boy, also accepts Islam. And amongst the men, amongst the free men, it is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. As soon as the Prophet ﷺ presents the message, he accepts it without doubt. To a point that later on the Prophet ﷺ said, when I came with the message, everybody had some sort of a hesitation. But Abu Bakr, immediately, because Abu Bakr was his friend, and he also had seen the Prophet ﷺ. So when the message was presented to him, immediately he accepts it. And when Abu Bakr accepts his message, he starts doing his own dawah. So remember, this is all hidden dawah. One person goes to the other, and then starting to sort of become a small network. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is also credited to bring to Islam the first and the most staunchest supporters of Islam, right? So he goes on to and gives the da'wah to Uthman radiallahu anhu, to Abdul Rahman bin Auf radiallahu anhu. So amongst a good part of the Ashra al-Mubashara, they're all bought into Islam by Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And most of them, they convert to Islam because of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And all of the first few people, they are generally known for their goodness. They're within the society of Makkah. They've always shunned themselves from the corruption that will be going on in the society. So these are the first few people that enter Islam, the first few converts. So you can say with the dawah, it is his household that accepts the Islam, and then it is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu outside the household, and then most of the people of the Ashra al-Mubashara, right? The 10 that have been promised paradise are the first few people to accept Islam, except Umar radiallahu anhu. And Umar, he comes down later, as we know how the story goes. So the hidden dawah goes on for a few years, right? And there's a very few supporters. Now the Meccans, they're hearing these chatter of a one God, a person, people now talking about a new concept of Tawheed, and they don't really take it seriously because there were some people within the Meccan society that were known as Hanif, right? They still believed in one God, and they didn't believe in the idols, so they didn't really take him seriously. But eventually, the command comes to go ahead and give open dawah, to go ahead and first warn his family and then give dawah in the open. So the Prophet ﷺ initially first invites his family, right? His family is Banu Hashim, and his if you go a step later, it is Banu Muttalib. So he invites his immediate family, his extended family, I should say, and then he has all his uncles, he has all his cousins within that group, and he gives them the message. And now, when he presents the message, really nobody responds except Ali radiallahu anhu, who's already a Muslim, but he's the only one who says, "I will be supporting you." And it's almost a comical scene, right, where this little kid, like this young barely teenaged kid, is saying, "I'm the one who's going to support you, Ya Rasulullah." And everybody else is quiet. Abu Lahab at that point he tells Abu Talib, "We've got to stop him. We've got to stop Muhammad. He can't come out with this message, because if he does, people are going to go against us." And Abu Talib says, "Listen, I know my nephew, right? I don't believe in his religion. I want to be on the religion of my forefathers, but I will continue to support him." And then the Prophet ﷺ goes on to the Quraysh. He climbs the mountain of Safa. At those times, the tradition was, if someone had an important announcement, they would basically climb up the mountain. They'd kind of make a scene, tear off their clothes, and then people would gather, and then they would say what they needed to say. Of course, the Prophet didn't do any of those things, like tearing off their clothes, but he went up to the mountain of Safa, and he called the entire people of Quraysh, and everybody gathered. Everybody gathered as a tradition is. And then he asks them, he says, would you believe me if I were to tell you that there is an army behind this mountain about to attack Mecca? Everybody says, we believe you. We believe you. Because you are a sadiq, you are al-amin, you have never lied, we know you in and out, we know that you're not going to speak a lie. Then he proclaims the message of Tawheed. He says, I am a messenger, and this is the message from God. And that's when Abu Lahab, he starts throwing things at the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, curse upon you, is this what you call us here for? And then that's where the dawah is out in the open and the persecution of Muslims begin. Now, again, if you remember, the Quraysh, the concept of one God is something that they just cannot grasp. The concept of resurrection is something that they cannot understand. This is something completely new. In addition to this, now the slaves and the downtrodden people of Mecca are beginning to get attracted to this message, right? Human beings are all equal. Now, this message, all of these things are new concepts, and immediately they see it threatening to their religion, to their way of life, and to the social structure of Makkatul Mukarram. So now there's a period of persecution. The first converts, other than the ones that I mentioned initially, are the people of the lower strata of the society, right? Bilal bin Rabah, that Dr. Abdul Bari a few days ago, he mentioned his story. He is one of the first few converts of Islam. He's a slave of Umayyah bin Khalaf, and we've heard of how he's tortured. He's put down on the burning sand, a stone is placed on his chest, but he does not deter, and he continues to say, Al-Ahad, Al-Ahad. And then you have Ammar radiallahu anhu, Ammar bin Yasir, and actually the whole family of Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anhu. They accept Islam, and they're tortured mercilessly to a point that the first shaheed of Islam, this is again a testament to the strength of Muslim women. The first shaheed in Islam is actually a woman, Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha. She continues to accept, she continues to be on Islam, not deterring in spite of being tortured in a very merciless way, until to the point that Abu Jahl kills her. So, and other people, the young people of Makkah are also getting influenced and are also getting impressed by this message. Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu anhu, as we see later on in the story, that he's the one who goes on and is almost single-handedly responsible for the entire conversion of Madinah al-Munawwara. He's a man from a very, very influential family, very, very upcoming person within the Quraysh, the entire Quraysh respects. And he sees the truth of Islam, he accepts it. And he is, subsequently, because of that, he's tortured by his own mother and chained within his own house. So a lot of people are being tortured, and a lot of people are being persecuted. Now, the Quraysh, even though they're torturing the people, and even though they are continuously bothered by this message, they themselves understand that this is something unique. This is not something that Muhammad SAW is making up, because they saw the Prophet ﷺ for the last 40 years. He never spoke the way he did. The words of the Quran were amazing. The Arabs were masters of Arabic. They were masters of poetry, right? And they could recognize poetry immediately when they would hear it. And when the words of the Quran would come, they would themselves be enchanted. They would say, what is this? This is an amazing word we've not heard. A lot of the times, their reason for not accepting the Quran is just sheer pride. The fact that it's tribal pride, the fact that they don't want to leave what their forefathers did. So those were the main reasons why they were opposed to the Quran. But just listening to the Quran, they would recognize that this is a unique and a new message, and it is not something that is close to the poetry or human speech that we're used to. So now, as the message is being propagated and people are getting impressed, they start plotting and planning. They're like, okay, how do we discredit the Prophet ﷺ? How do we tell people that Muhammad ﷺ is not to be followed? So now they come up with all kinds of propaganda, right? They gather and they start thinking, what do we call him? Do we call him a poet? And then this happens at various stages during the dawah, but the leaders of the Quraysh, they sit down, they put their heads together, and like, how can we stop this? How can we stop this message from spreading? So they say, okay, can we call him a poet? And then they shake their heads. Like the best of their poets will come and say, this is not poetry. You know that we're the masters of poetry, right? This cannot be a poetry. Can we call him Majnoon? Can we call him a madman? So that people don't listen to him. People think that he's crazy. They say, look, we all know how madmen look like, right? The Prophet ﷺ is of an impeccable character. He's unblemished. You speak to him, he's the most eloquent, the most level-headed, the person who makes the most sense. Mad people are not like that. We can't call him mad. Then they decide, let's just call him a soothsayer, or a sorcerer, somebody who's able to contact with jinns, or somebody who is involved in the black world, in the unseen world. That's the best that they could come up with. But even then, they themselves know that this is not what's going on. So finally, they also come up with strategies. So how can we deter the Prophet? Again, this doesn't necessarily happen immediately when the message comes, but this happens in stages, in different stages of the dawah. At one point, they come to Abu Talib and they say, listen, we have to stop Muhammad. He's dividing Sallallahu, he's dividing the society. He's pitting father against son, brother against brother. This is not the way to proceed, because if we do that, Quraysh is going to suffer. Our value within the Arab world is going to diminish. So you have to do something to stop Muhammad Sallallahu. So then they tell him, listen, we will do whatever Muhammad wants, right? If he wants to be rich, we will collect all the wealth that we have and make sure that his wealth is going to be the most amongst all people. So he's going to be the richest. If he wants to be a king, we will declare him to be the king, right? If he wants to marry, we will give him the best of women to marry. Whatever he wants, we'll give it to him. But the only thing that we ask is he stops declaring this oneness of God. And then the Prophet ﷺ gives his iconic answer. And it's the words that he uses. I don't think there is anything that a person in history has expressed that is more eloquent in terms of showing a determination. Prophet ﷺ says, if you keep the sun in one of my hands and the moon in the other hand, even if you were able to do that, forget about the money you're talking about, forget about the woman and whatever bribes that you want to present to me. Even if you were to do something as impossible as putting the sun and the moon in the hand, I'm not going to deter. I'm not going to stop. So at that point, Abu Talib, he realizes, I cannot stop my nephew. My nephew is going to continue with this message till this affair is complete. So then he tells the Prophet ﷺ, I'm going to support you, do whatever you want. And he goes to the Quraysh and he says, I'm not going, after this point, don't ask and tell me to stop Muhammad ﷺ. He's my nephew and I'm going to support him, no matter what. So then, these plots and plans continue, but in spite of that, Muslims are trickling in, right? People are gradually accepting Islam. People not only from within the Quraysh, but from outside, or not necessarily the Quraysh, but from outside of Makkah. You have Abu Dhal al-Ghifari, you have Tufail, they come from outside. And when these people come from outside, again, they have detailed stories in themselves, and we won't have time to get into the stories. But the Makkans, when they find out that people from outside are coming, they say, don't listen to Muhammad, don't listen to this man. One of the Sahabi that I mentioned about Tufail, he actually, has people tell him, don't listen to the Prophet ﷺ. So he tries to ensure that his ears are covered, so the words of the Quran don't penetrate. But the beauty and the power of the Quran, as soon as these Sahabis hear the Quran, they immediately testify to its truth. So, all these things are going on in spite of the people trying to persecute the Muslims. The message, it continues to be spread slowly but surely. And then when the persecution becomes to a point where people are getting physical and the Muslims are starting to get hurt, the Prophet ﷺ basically says to the group of Muslims that are suffering the most, he allows them to migrate to Abyssinia, right? So that is the next step that happens. After the persecution, right? The next step that happens is the migration to Abyssinia. So the first right? The first few migrants are 12 men and 4 women. 12 men and 4 women are the people who migrate to Abyssinia. And the delegation basically, the prominent people of the delegation are Jafar bin Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu, and Uthman radiyallahu anhu, and his wife Ruqayya radiyallahu anha, the daughter of the Prophet. So they migrate to Abyssinia, and Abyssinia has a king called Najashi, who is known for his justice. He's a Christian king, but he's known for his justice. So all of them go there. Now, initially there's a rumor that the Quraysh have become Muslims, so some of them come back, but eventually they realize that that's a false rumor, and some of them return, some of them stay in Makkah al-Mukarramah. Now, in order to deter these Muslims who have left to Abyssinia, because now the Quraysh are worried that if outside of Makkah, if the Muslims are forming a base and they get support, then they might come back with a vengeance. So they send Amr bin al-As, who is also a Sahabi. He becomes a Sahabi later on in his life, but he has contacts with Najashi. He has a great relationship with Najashi. He goes there for trade, and he gives Najashi the presents. So he goes back, and he goes to Najashi and says, we have a couple of people who are renegades, who are runaway slaves, or who are runaway people from our city. I want you to return them to us. So Najashi, again, he's a just king. So he says, I'm not going to just hand them to you. I have to listen to what they say. So then they're brought in the court, and Jafar bin Abi Talib, that he's the spokesman of the Muslims, right? So then the Najashi asks him, okay, what do you represent? What do you have to say? So he gives an amazing and eloquent speech about saying how the state of the Quraysh they were in darkness and absolute corruption, and how the Prophet ﷺ came with the message, and how the message was a message of peace, a message of goodness, a message that basically took the poor and the downtrodden out of their oppression. So the Najashi listens to all of this, and anybody with any sense of justice would recognize that this is the truth. So he says, yeah, what you're saying is the truth. What you're saying is the truth. So and at that point, the Qurayshi men, including Amr bin al-As, that had come to get the people back, they sort of get upset. So Amr bin al-As then basically incites the Najashi and says, listen, these people, it all looks good what they're saying, but you know what they say about Jesus? They don't consider Jesus the Son of God. They don't consider him. Ask him that. And now the Najashi then says, tell me what do you say? So now you can see the position that Jafar bin Abi Talib is in right now, right? He's at this point in a sensitive position, but subhanAllah, he doesn't compromise. And this is a lesson for us. Like when it comes to our deen, and when it comes to the basic principles of our deen, we don't need to compromise. Alhamdulillah, the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come. So he then starts reciting the verses of Surah Maryam. He starts reciting the verses of Surah Maryam. And when he does that, the Najashi, when he hears those words, immediately he starts to cry. Those words, they became, he starts to cry immediately, and he says, whatever you've spoken about Jesus, that is the truth. Even though it bothers the people in his court, even though it bothers Amr bin al-As and the Qurayshi people, he said, whatever you said about Jesus, والسلام, that is the truth. So now the Muslims over there in Abyssinia, they're allowed to live there in some sort of in some degree of security. Now, meanwhile, back in Makkah, another amazing event happens, right? But the Muslims are now weak and persecuted, but their ranks are strengthened by 2 new additions, right? They are none other than Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Umar bin al-Khattab, and Hamza radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, these are the 2 new additions, right? And they have details to their conversion. Hamza radiyallahu anhu, as we remember, he is the uncle of the Prophet, right? They are very close in age, because interestingly, when Abdullah, the father of the Prophet, got married, it's on the same day his father, Abdul Muttalib, meaning the grandfather and the father of the Prophet, got married around the same time. And they got married to cousins. So Hamza was born, and he was born around the same time as the Prophet. So they were very close in age, and they were also very tight, because they essentially grew up together. So even though Hamza was not an early Muslim, and an immediate acceptor to the call of Islam, he would try to support the Prophet. So at one time, Abu Jahl goes, out of bounds, and he hits the Prophet and he hurts him. So Hamza is at that time hunting. So he's a very strong, personality, and he's returning to Makkah, and his slave girl tells him, "Do you know what Abu Jahl did to your nephew?" And she relates to him, he hit him to a point that he was bleeding. Hamza immediately gets angry. He goes to Abu Jahl, gives him a smack with his bow, hits his head, and he said, "You did this to Muhammad. Now, no, I am on the religion of Muhammad." And now the people of Bani Makhzum, the supporters of Abu Jahl, are trying to attack Hamza, but he stops him and says, "No, I did that to his nephew. Just let him go." And then, even though Hamza initially, declares his loyalty to Islam in a state of trying to protect the Prophet, but once the message settles down, he goes and he truly accepts Islam. So now Hamza is a part of the Muslims. And then the conversion of Umar again is a historic conversion. I'm sure most of us are aware of the story. It's a gradual stage. The first time Umar is curious. Again, Umar even though he becomes Muslim, the people say he's around the 40th person to become Muslim. Immediately, because of his taqwa and his rank, he's raised up to number 2, right after Abu Bakr. But the way he accepts Islam is gradually in stages. So at one point, the Prophet is reciting the Quran within the Haram, within the Kaaba. So Umar, he goes and he hides behind the ghilaf of the Kaaba, the cloth of the Kaaba, just to listen to the words. And he's completely enamored. He's completely impressed by the words. And he says, this has got to be the words of a poet. And then the surah that the Prophet is reciting, immediately the next ayah is, these are not the words of a poet. And he thinks, oh my God, because he's reading my mind, he must be a soothsayer. He must be somebody who can read his mind. And the next ayah is, these are not the words of the soothsayer. These are the words of Rabbul Alameen. So that sort of plants the seed within the heart of Umar. And then the actual conversion is very, very dramatic, as we all know, right? Umar decides one morning that this is it. I'm going to set the record straight once and for all. I'm going to get rid of Muhammad, and he is dividing the entire society of Quraysh. And you can recognize how, his bravery, because nobody dared to do something like that, right? But Umar, in his own way, he was sincere. And that is the reason why Allah also blessed him with Islam. As a matter of fact, the Prophet made the dua, "Oh Allah, give Islam to the one who you love more, either Umar or Abu Jahl," right? And because of the sincerity of Umar, he was the one who was the recipient of the acceptance of the dua. So he takes his sword and he's just out and he's like, "I'm going to finish Muhammad once and for all." As he's walking, another Sahabi who's secretly accepted Islam, he encounters Umar, and now he wants to divert Umar's attention to the Prophet. He says, "Look, you want to go kill the Prophet? Why don't you take care of your own house, your own sister Fatima, and your own brother-in-law Sayyid?" I believe his name is Sayyid bin Zaid. They've accepted Islam. Why don't you go take care of them? And then immediately his wrath is now directed to them, to his own sister and his brother, right? The brother-in-law. He goes to their house. Another Sahabi is there, Khabbab. He's reciting them the Quran. As soon as he hears the footsteps of Umar, he hides inside under the bed or in a place. Umar barges in the house. He says, "What's going on over here?" He finds he finds that that they're reading the Quran. There's secret recitation of the Quran going on, and then he starts manhandling his brother-in-law. His sister tries to intervene. He hits her sister, and as he hits his sister, he hurts her. And at that point, there's something that goes inside his heart, and he feels sorry. And then he asks his sister, "Show me the words that you were reading." At that point, his sister, he says, "Omar, do what you want. We're Muslims, and this is how we're going to be. You can kill us. You can hurt us in any way you want to, but we are going to continue to be following this message." And at that time, he has suddenly this realization. He says, "Okay, give me the words that you were reading." And then as he reads the first few ayah of Surah Taha, immediately he says, "I accept this. How do I become Muslim?" His sister tells him, "This is what you have to do." And then from there onwards, Umar goes to Darul Arqam. So Darul Arqam is a sort of a hideout for the Muslims where everybody gathers. It's a house of a young Sahabi who he lets his house to be sort of the dawah center, if you will. And then all the Muslims are gathered there. Umar goes there, and immediately the Muslims are worried. Okay, Umar is here. And Umar, as we talked about, he's a strong personality, right? Hamza says, "Listen, let him come." And you can see the character of how strong Umar and Hamza are, right? Hamza says, "Let him come. If he's coming with goodness, he'll be accepted. If he is not, then we'll kill him with his own sword. We'll kill him with his own sword." So Umar goes inside, and the Prophet, again, now you can see the bravery of the Prophet, right? He goes on to Umar and basically pulls him down, and he says, tries to basically ask them, what do you want? When will you accept this message? And that's when Umar declares that Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. So those are the stories of the early Meccan period where Umar and Hamza radiallahu accept Islam. And as soon as Umar and Hamza are within the ranks of the Muslims, the situation of Muslims changes, because they bring a new invigoration, they invigorate a new strength. And for the first time, the Muslims now go to the Kaaba, almost in two groups, one group behind Umar, one group behind Hamza, and they walk into the Haram. And the Quraysh are completely like flabbergasted. Like, how can this happen? Within what, we're basically witnessing the Muslims who are now a weak group who didn't even dare worship openly are now walking inside the Kaaba, with Umar and Hamza. And at this point, they've had it. And then they go on to the next stage of persecution, which will be banning the Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib. And inshallah, we will talk about that tomorrow. So again, that was the early Meccan phase. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll talk about the late Meccan phase, and inshallah, maybe the early part of the Hijrah. So we are running a little behind because of losing about 15 minutes tomorrow. But inshallah, hopefully, we will be able to cover that in the oncoming sessions, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, inshallah. Then we will join again tomorrow around the same time, and then proceed from there. Wa akhir da'wan alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair.